Welcome everyone who's joining. Thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to give a moment or two to let the remainder of our participants join, and we'll begin shortly. All right. Well, again, welcome and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Odette Falone. I am Inspired Instructions Director of Consultant Development. I am very happy to be here with you today, speaking about strategies for designing effective and sustainable centers and really maximizing the impact of that time with our students. So let's begin. All right. So our agenda for this afternoon includes the following components. We're going to start off quickly by just reviewing what centers are all about. What's the what and the why of centers, and what is the value behind doing them? And really, then, what is the when? When is the right time to get started? When should you begin practicing the routines, the procedures, and planning of centers for your students each year? Third, we're going to really dig into the how. This is the meat of our webinar today. So what are the steps for implementing centers? How can we make them as effective as possible and really maximize that time, as I mentioned? And how can we work smarter, right? How can we plan and strategize and create centers that are reusable and sustainable for continued use in future years and for augmentation as students and teachers are working into new academic years? And lastly, how can we improve? So a common practice of educators is reflection, and I believe it is so very important in everything that we do. So we're going to talk about how we can reflect on the sensors that we are currently doing or those that we will eventually try, and how we can refine and rework and modify to make them even more streamlined and effective. All right, so let's get going. Our first section, the what and the why. What are sensors all about? So small group instruction is not something new, but maybe new to some, as you know, direct instruction may be a part of your daily instruction. But with small group instruction, we are looking at groups of 2 to 6 students, and that really should be kept small. We want to keep the impact at the max. So the smaller the group that you can construct, the better. And really, we want to keep the number of groups small just for management purposes, right? So depending on your class size, you know, if you have a larger class, 6 students is okay in a center, and maybe creating 4 or 5 groups in that manner would be able to give you the most impact from the groups that you create. You want to make sure you're using data as a guide as well in terms of small group instruction. So data will help you identify what areas of need you want to implement in your small groups, where you want to focus your instruction in your teacher-led small group, and what you'd like to focus on to fill in any gaps that may need reinforcement or supplemental material. So that leads me to the next piece, reteaching, reinforcing, and extending. Teacher-led centers can be used for any of those things, and to eliminate misconceptions, extend learning. I can't tell you how many aha moments I would see when I'm working with a small group of students on something that maybe I've been trying to teach for a few days now. And when I get that small group and that more individualized attention with these students, you're able to really reach them on a different level and differentiate and meet with them where they are. So that teacher-led center is huge for improved instruction and really targeting those areas of need. So again, eliminating some of those misconceptions and reinforcing some of those learning goals. You also want small groups to be flexible and differentiated. So centers should be designed in a way that it creates a learning, it makes learning accessible for all students. It meets all students where they are and allows them to learn at their own rate. But flexibility of the grouping is really important. You're going to be changing the topics that you're working on each time you do small group instruction. So groups should, from time to time, change as well. Some students may be stronger with some skills than others. And we want to keep those groups fluid and moving so that students have interactions with other peers and working with students of all different levels and learning styles. Okay. So what's the value? Um, I won't sugarcoat it. Small group instruction can be, can involve a lot of planning and organization. But again, just to reiterate how valuable it is, and it is so worth the time that you put in to developing some of these activities and lessons. The value is really truly endless. 4 bullets that I have listed here. This is not a comprehensive list by any means. But as I mentioned previously, centers really do provide the opportunity for more individualized support. You can really get one-on-one with students, and in those small group settings, make a lot of progress. Students are more likely to participate. They're more likely to ask more specific questions in that small group setting. It's more low stakes for them to be speaking to you on that face level, sitting down at the table together. And you can really start to see where students are feeling a little bit, like they are struggling and how you can address those things. You can also very closely monitor student progress. So you can really see in real time what steps students are making. Let's say in a math problem, you can watch exactly the steps they take and catch where the mistakes happen and start to address some of those misconceptions right on the spot. So you can give that timely feedback and just think about how valuable that truly is. And finally, small group settings can really provide students with a confidence boost. To be honest, again, arranging these small group centers, I would typically have one teacher-led group and then 3 others that would be working on various activities, and we'll share some examples shortly. But students would look very forward to having that teacher time in that small group center. Didn't matter what was going on in the other groups, that's where they wanted to be. So it gave them a boost of confidence to be able to see you smile directly at what they're doing, to encourage them and provide them with the feedback they know they need to be able to succeed. So again, endless value, but really some key points driven home there. Just a quick quote to reiterate that. Findings have stated that multi-level ordinal regression analyses showed that children were 3 times more likely to be cognitively and behaviorally engaged and 1.5 times more likely to be emotionally engaged during collaborative groups than direct instruction. When you are in those small group settings, students are with you. They're excited to be there. They're engaged. Their behavior even changes just because of the setting that they're in. So again, those aha moments and these specific reasons are few of the many that make the time it takes to plan and use small groups instruction just so worth it. The research shows it. So I feel I definitely have felt that in my experience with small group instruction, but it's clearly research backed that there is so much of benefit to incorporating that into your day. Okay. So the when can you get things started with small group instruction? Many teachers wonder this, when's the right time to get going? Because as the school year starts, there's so many things that you're introducing to students. Classroom rules, routines, procedures, where things are in the classroom and all of that. So when is the sweet spot? When's the right time to start to introduce small group instruction and start to leverage some of the benefits that come along with it? So typically, suggestion is to begin as early as 6 weeks after the first day of school. Totally aware that we're now in the month of March, and it's never too late to begin introducing small group instruction if you haven't already. But traditionally, we want to keep those first 6 weeks with students getting used to the culture, the climate, getting to know their classroom space, getting to know their teacher, getting to know the routines of the classroom and the rules. And then those those management styles and skills that you are already implementing can start to transition into how you're developing your small groups. So once you have an idea of the levels that your students are at, where you've given your assessments, you've started to be able to analyze some of that data. and you can identify some of the targets that you want to focus on, you're ready to start. Okay. So again, at this point in the year, I'm sure we've conducted benchmarks, we've had unit tests, we've done assessments and things. We have enough formative assessment to be able to start implementing some of these targeted groups. So it's never too late. And, if you are thinking about beginning some of these practices in the new year, as early as 6 weeks is completely okay. All right. So now the how. What are the steps for planning small group instruction? What do we want to be thinking about when we are starting out and starting to plan and create and construct some of these activities and lessons? How do we get this off the ground? So planning for sensors, there are a few different topics within this topic of planning that we're going to explore today. So the first is setting expectations, and we'll go a little bit deeper into that topic and what that exactly means. But this is absolutely critical for successful centers. Expectations need to be set so that students are aware of what you expect as their educator from them when centers are being facilitated. Center management, again, goes hand in hand with those expectations, and we'll share some tips and tricks, best practices for how to manage your centers. Because as you are working with a small group of students, you would like to have your other groups, flowing, working, and being on task. And that management piece is key to be able to have that effectively work. We'll go ahead and talk in a few minutes about grouping students. What are best practices for how we design our center groups and, how we use data to do that. Creating strategic activities. So my favorite piece, really thinking about intentionally how we are developing and designing our center activities. These types of things, planning out centers that activities that can be reused or, manipulated in a way that it's limiting the amount of copies that you need to make or the amount of cutting or gluing or grading, because all of those things can feel overwhelming if you are having to score and grade or create a new activity every time that you're doing centers. So we'll talk a little bit about how to be strategic about those things and develop activities that are sustainable, that can make centers feel smooth and easy and just part of your daily routine and not like a heavy lift for you. We'll then go into how to prepare and store those materials. Again, organization is a big part of developing centers, especially for sustainable ones. And reusing materials is key as well. And then finally, we'll talk about monitoring progress. So just as you're going to plan what activities you're doing in a strategic way. You're going to plan the expectations that you plan to set and how you're going to manage your centers and group your students. You're also going to want to plan for how you monitor the progress that students are making, because that will in turn continue the cycle and inform how you group your students next time and how you are going to address any misconceptions or gaps in learning that you might recognize. All right, so let's begin to dig into some of these topics. Okay. So as I mentioned, setting expectations is absolutely critical for successful implementation of small group instruction. Before you start your first small group session, before you even begin to think about getting going on centers, you need to really discuss with students what kind of factors would contribute to successful small group work, right? Ask them because they will know what is distracting for them, what makes them get off task? What kinds of things impede their work? And have that discussion with students because they will likely feed you the information you already want to share with them. But, coming from them gives them a little bit more ownership of what you're going to be sharing next, which is the expectations that you have when working in small groups. So you really want to paint a clear picture of what small groups should look like, what it should sound like, all those little details. So they're super aware and clear about what it is that your expectations are. So they know if they cross a line that it's been crossed, in other words. without those clear expectations set, you really can't be disappointed if students don't act appropriately because they haven't been informed about what the expectations are. Students might expect, oh, I'm working in small groups. That means I get to talk with my friends, and this is the volume that I use, and I'm going to get up and go do whatever I need to do if I need a tissue or I need to get, sharpen my pencil. But if you have certain expectations set and they're aware of them, there, will be a different manner of functioning, a different level of functioning for these centers. Also, before you can even start thinking about assignments being put into these small groups, you want to practice the routines that you have established and the procedures as many times as you can, as many times as possible, without even assignments in front of them. You can have students, let's say, set up a fishbowl method where students are sitting around in a circle and maybe you have one mock group in the middle of the circle, and you can ask them to use different noise levels, demonstrate what's okay and not okay to be doing in a center, and have students discuss and talk about that. Then have them practice those transitions, moving from one group to another, figuring out where materials go and such, and so on. So some of these things here, what small group instruction should look like, sound like, these are some of the questions that you can use to prompt students when discussing what expectations they feel should be set for working in these small group centers. So, for example, you might ask them, what noise level do you expect to be acceptable when you're working on something that's independent? What noise level when you're working on something that's with partners? What noise level when you're working with the teacher? What level of mobility do you have? Are you going to allow students to just be able to get up when they need something without having to ask? It depends on your group, right? How much time are you going to be allotting for your centers? What quality of work do you expect? Again, because these are things that students are going to be wondering. They're going to wonder, are you checking this work? Where does this go? And again, depending on how you plan to structure some of those pieces, you can feed that information to them and share those expectations. Also very important is the organization of materials. Maybe you use a bucket that goes in the middle of the table. Maybe you use a folder. It could be a file folder, a pocket folder, or an envelope. However you decide to organize the materials, make sure students are aware of where things go and where they should place them when they're done with their center. Same thing with transitions. How are students knowing which center they're going to next? And we'll talk through all of these things as well in a moment. But how are they knowing where to go to next? What does it look like for students to move from one center to the next? Are we running? Are we walking? Are we, bringing our materials with them? Are we leaving them there? How long do they have to get from one center to the next? And then when is it acceptable to interrupt the teacher station? So there's a lot of different strategies I've seen in this particular, that feed into this particular question. But mainly, again, you decide if you really want to have your students working on their own, independently, or with their partners while you are at your teacher-led station, because you want to maximize the time you have with that small group that you're working with. So you want to come up with ways that you can limit interruptions as much as possible. I'll share a few with you shortly. Because again, that's how you're going to really get the most out of the time that you have, which is a short time with those students, but it can pack a powerful punch. All right. So we spoke a little bit about setting expectations and asking students to come up with some of their own ideas for what is acceptable in centers or in small group instruction. One tool that you can use is this small group expectations contract. At the end of today's webinar, I've put together a resource sheet that will include everything that I'm sharing with you today. So you'll have access to print and use any of the resources that I discuss. And this is the first of a few. So while this expectation sheet might seem simple, it's a great place for you and your students to come up with a plan on what is expected of students and what is expected from the teacher and what is expected from both groups. As a class, you can come up with, brainstorm lots of different things that students should be expected to do and that teacher is expected to do and that both groups are expected to do, and sign this contract. This can be something that you bring with you or bring up to the students every time that you are going to be facilitating small group instruction. Remind them of this contract that they signed, that they helped put together. Because again, it's ownership over what they suggested as far as the expectations go. Refer back to it as frequently as you need to. Whoop. Let me move back here. So another resource that we'll share is a small group instructions, small group expectations poster. It's something of an anchor chart that can be laminated, hung up, or passed around, or even, again, taped on a folder or a sign that you're using when you do small group instruction. But it's another way to discuss those expectations. Getting along, respecting each other, staying on task, using quiet voices, and participating in your group. Okay, so again, this could be a launching off point, or it could be, again, something that you refer to each time you're going to be starting small groups to remind students where their mindset should be. Okay, so limiting interruptions and distractions. This is a major part of all teachers' thinking when they are working in small groups, because again, students have needs that they're going to want to express to you. And when you're working in small groups, you want to have as much of that time with your teacher-led group as possible in a nice isolated way. So the amount of time that you spend with every group, could vary based on the level of students or stamina of students. Typically, we want to keep our centers between 15 and 30 minutes max. Again, depending on the students that you're working with, probably closer to that 15-minute mark. And in that window of time, there's lots of opportunity for interruptions and distractions. So some ways that you can mitigate some of that is to have printed instructions. So this example here shows you something that you could create and leave at each center. So when there is an opportunity for question of what to do, students have somewhere to go before coming to ask you. Okay, so for example, this is a center 2 for conventions. It gives you a noise level that students should be working at this center, and it gives you 4 or 5 steps. Really, any more than that is a little long for students to follow, but it gives you the activity directions, and they can refer back to it when they have a question. So in this case, there's a few center instruction sheets here, just as examples. And you might want to say you have a center leader that really internalizes what the directions are. So not only do the group members have this instruction sheet, they also have a center leader to ask questions to before they come to you. So you can assign roles like that to also mitigate some of the interruptions. So that's where the leader comes in. So having that center leader can, again, be it's a nice confidence boost for students to be assigned that task. And they take it very seriously to be in charge and to hold the directions that, come along with this particular center. Another great practice is to include hand signals. So many teachers use these to allow students to signal to them when they need to use the restroom, get a tissue, get a drink of water. If you're not using these already, these are great to use in centers because at a glance, you can see while students are working if they need to use the restroom without them coming over to interrupt. And you can just quietly call their name and say, go right ahead or not. Okay. Another tool is called a noisometer. And I show this little traffic signal here as a symbol for that. But really a noisometer can really look however you choose. It could be, an arrow pointing to different colors. But in this case, this resource uses a traffic signal to demonstrate the different noise levels that a class can or students can use in different centers. So as you saw on my center direction sheet, the groups that we're going to be working in centers 2, 3, and 4 would be talking at a yellow level. And again, these are expectations that you set before you ever start an activity, well on before. You share with students when you see a red noise level, that means you're working independently and there shouldn't be a sound. If your group is working at a yellow level, that means you can talk quietly in your small groups, but other groups should not be able to hear what you're saying. If you're working at a green noise level, it's okay to talk in your normal speaking voice with your group. So this can be used in many different capacities. When students are working on projects together or doing a turn and talk, you can intentionally say, okay, I'm moving this noise-o-meter from red to yellow. You'll go ahead and talk quietly with a partner, and then you can move it back to red when the teacher's talking or what have you. But in this case, for a small group instruction, it works really nicely because you can assign each group its own noise level. And in some cases, groups might be asked to work at a red level where they are working independently on the same activity, but separate from each other. And that's okay. So that again gives them more clarity and expectation on where their noise level should be. Using a timer is another great tool with small group instruction, as many other activities can benefit from timers. Um, and I said, starting with the shorter end, between 15 to 30 minutes for small groups, you want to post a schedule or post how long you're going to allow each group to work. Put that timer on the board so students can keep track of how much time remains and where they're going to be going next and all of those things. So that timer again gives an additional piece for students to refer to. And also for the teacher, I know it does help as well to kind of keep things moving along and not lose track of time when you're really in the groove with a group. You have that timer to keep things moving along and keep your pacing on point. And finally, extension assignments. So this is one of those things that can often be forgotten. And one way to strategically do it is to have a set of extension assignments that can be used at any given time. So frequently in my experience when facilitating small group instruction, I would have a bin of extension activities that students, if they were finished with their work in their center, they would know that is where they go. It's expected that they're going to put their work in the appropriate place and grab one of the extension assignments. Now, these could be a number of different things. It could be grammar worksheets, it could be multiplication facts, it could be, um, you know, let's say, a problem of the day. There's a lot of different things that you can include in that area. And if you'd like to give students choice, it could be, a tic-tac-toe board with different problems on there. But in any case, it's something that students are expected to do when their work on their small group activity is done. If that does happen, that they finish before time is up. Okay, because that is where the distractions and the interruptions will really thrive if students are finished with their work and they don't know what to do next. So you want to have that covered at any cost. Okay, so center management. Um, there are a lot of different ways to organize centers in small groups, from ability level to the focus topic that you're working on. But it's really important to, again, as I mentioned before, keep those groupings fluid, move students into different groups from time to time, because while they might excel in one area, they might struggle with another. So you want to keep the groups moving based on the needs that the students have. Your assessment data and all of that can really help you plan for what groups you might move students into and what targets you're going to be looking to work on and achieve with them. Now, one example of a small group situation could look like this, where you have 4 small groups. Group 1 could be working with the teacher, and that could be on a number of different topics. You decide based on what your data is telling you about your students and what targets you would like to work on with each individual group that you're seeing. It might be the same topic, but at a different level that you're working with each group based on how you have your students grouped. In groups 2, 3, and 4, you would have work that's differentiated happening and taking place in each group. For example, you might have, a teacher-led group, you might have a group where students are working independently on something, you might have a group where students are working in partners, and maybe one group where students are working as a whole team. And depending on, the themes that you're circulating around, that could look a little different. So what does it mean to say, okay, the work is differentiated? Now that could mean a number of different things, providing students with choice and so on. One example that I'll show you here is this vocabulary go-togethers. I love this activity because it can be used in any content area, and it really differentiates because it meets students where they are in terms of their knowledge on a topic. So here, this example uses scientific, academic vocabulary for science, speaking to volcanoes and magma and sedimentary rock and the rock cycle and all of that. It provides the students with a series of words and asks them to circle the words they know in green, circle the words they've heard of in blue, and circle the words that are new to them in red. And then below, they make those connections. Which words go together in this group? How do they know, draw some ways that the words are related or write down some of the ways that the words are related. You can elevate this by using, new vocabulary, high level vocabulary from texts or novels that you're reading. And a template is found here. So again, this again can be used across grade bands and really gives you a picture into what students know, what they still need support with, and what kind of connections they're making, since they're able to use words that they know and identify them in this group. You are, again, meeting them where they are. So this is just one example of something students can work on, and I'll share a few others as well. Okay. Actually, that activity, just like many others, can also really set the stage for future discussion in future lessons that you're doing. So if you are really planning ahead, you could prime the pump a little bit by sharing an activity about, the rock cycle in a center, and then leverage that information and bring it into your science lesson when you're doing that next. So again, it's that kind of planning that really makes these strategic and effective. So as I said, planning is a huge part of small group instruction in order to make it successful. And again, the planning will always in turn be worth the time because you'll see the value the progress will definitely be evident. So one way to kind of get thoughts down on paper and start planning things out is using this small group instruction lesson planner. I'll expand it here quickly. So this is a template that you'll receive at the end of today's webinar, but it's a place where you can jot down your groups based on the data that you've collected and create, what your teacher-led groups are going to do, what your teacher-led group is going to look like for each group that you're working with. It might be the same target skill, a different progress monitoring measure. And what are your small group stations going to look like for each? Okay, so it just is a place that you can start to flesh out your ideas and, think about what topics you want to be supplementing and reinforcing for your students. Okay, so this image that you see here on the right is just an example of how one teacher may display her centers. And, group numbers are listed there, students' names are listed there. And then, of course, they're easy to be able to be shuffled and moved around based on, how you want to reorganize your groups. So in that location, students can be aware, okay, let me take a look here. Oh, I'm in center 3 right now, and I'm going to go ahead and move there. And then with a shuffle of the cards, you can move the numbers to show students where they're headed to next. Okay. So we want to try to plan activities that allow for the following things. This is really all part of being strategic and creating sustainable centers. Because just looking at that lesson plan, you might be thinking, okay, wow, I need to plan for 4 different things for that block of time. That's a lot. Okay, yes. So you want to plan for activities that involve easy execution, right? Things that have materials that can be reused. You want to plan for activities that are going to practice skills and concepts that have already been learned or inquiry for new topics. So not assessment of any new topics or learning of any new topics, but maybe inquiry of some new topics, something similar to that Go Together sheet that I shared. Or maybe using some thinking routines where you show an image and ask students to think about what they see, what they think, what they wonder about a picture that you're sharing with them. That again is starting to develop some inquiry about a topic. What we don't want to do is present something in student-led small groups that students are going to feel is new to them. Because then again, you will start to see a lot of disruptions, interruptions, questions that they're going to be coming to you for. So you want to start to practice those skills and concepts they've learned, differentiate that so that you're reinforcing and refining what has been learned and keeping that in their toolkit, in their, their memory. You also want to have active engagement for each student. So if you are creating a center where students are going to work as a team, you want to be very intentional to make sure that this activity will include all students that are working together, right? So that might mean having students work in partners of two so that you have that active engagement, and they can work together rather than having any students that might feel a little bit like an outlier and sitting off to the side. You might want to plan for activities that allow for group discussion. If you have your expectations set where students can discuss things quietly, and that's what the goal is, group discussion is a great thing to include in these small group centers. You also want to plan for accountability because the work that students are doing in those small groups, you want them to know that it is valued and that you are going to take a look at it and you are going to review what they've done. And it's not just going to be, oh, I'm going to work on this here and my teacher's not going to see what I did or didn't do. So we'll talk about some ways that you can incorporate that so students know that, again, their work is counting for something, that it is going to be reviewed, and that their answers or can be checked and things. But we, at the same time, we don't want to overload your plate with 4 different things to score at the end of each small group instruction center or session. Another way could be, again, to include reflection. So having students thinking about their thinking, having students reflect on the work that they did, reflect on a topic that they've recently learned about. These are the kinds of things that you can start to inject into these small groups. Okay. So how can we create strategic activities? First, we want to start by making sure we're thinking about the skills that students need, not just standard. And of course, the standards are very important, but within those standards, there are skills that students need to develop to be able to master certain standards, right? So thinking and really reading between the lines and identifying where are the skill gaps that I need to hit to get students to where they need to be to master these standards. So again, those things that we can start to really be intentional about what we're targeting. You also want to make sure you're planning with intention. So I mentioned this earlier, but you want to provide variety to the groups that you're developing. One is teacher-led, one might be partner work, one might be collaborative work, one might be work that students are working independently in a different section of the room, right? All together at the same time, working on the same activity. Maybe it's a differentiated activity, but they're working independently. Another way to kind of plan around is if you are doing a language arts center block, you can mix things up and think about the skills. Have a phonics center, a fluency center, a vocabulary center, a comprehension center, right? To really flesh out and round out what students are doing during that time. And again, we want students to be really hitting all of those areas. So they might say, okay, well, I have a little bit of a hard time with vocabulary, but when I get to that comprehension center, I know I'm going to be great. And it gives, again, that cycle will feel a little bit more comfortable for students if there is that variety there. Self-check activities. are a really great tool in small group centers. These are activities that you can provide to students to work, and then once they're complete, you provide them with an answer key and they can self-check their work. Okay, so they already get that immediate feedback of where they went wrong, if they did everything correctly, how they can fix. And it's again takes the onus off of the teacher to have to review and check everything, but instead they can hand you their self-checked work. So this is an example of one. I'll share it here. I love this activity. It's called the Shades of Meaning. And this really directly aligns with, our standards as well as what students might see on the high stakes assessments. Um, Taking a word and showing all different shades of meaning within it and having students identify where these words might fit in best. So this shades of word meaning activity, the way you would create it, you have a directions piece, you would cut that out, glue that on the front of an envelope, and then cut out these little cards and glue and stick them inside the envelope. So they'd have these 9 cards inside an envelope. Tiptoe, trudge, stroll, skip, run, walk, hike, stomp, march. And with those little cards, they are using them to place appropriately into these blue boxes. So using the context of the sentence, they're trying to decide where would the word, let's say, trudge fit in best? Where would the words stroll or walk or skip or hop fit in best? Okay, so this could be something that's laminated or stuck in a page protector. It's used year after year. Students don't have to write on it. They're just using those cards and organizing them in a way that they feel is most appropriate. And then once they're done, you can hand them this answer key. And they can self-check using what they lined up there. They'll see, oh, did I use stroll for number 1, tiptoe for number 2, and so on, and mark themselves that way and hand that piece in. Okay. So, you might recognize a trend in some of that information or that data that you collect and say, oh, you know what? Most students did not put the right word in trudge in box number 4. Maybe they're not sure what that word means, and I'm going to make sure I highlight that and speak to it next time we meet. Okay. So again, this is a great activity that includes that self-check component. Okay. All right. So there's many different ways that you can incorporate that piece of self-checking, but that's just one example. You can also think long term and try to create materials that can be reused. So anything that you can laminate and have students use dry erase markers, or put in page protectors and have students use dry erase markers. Those worksheets or activity sheets, or we can call them graphic organizers or templates that you might have students use, can be used time and time again without having to recopy. You just go right ahead and grab from a filing cabinet if you stored it away. Those types of templates can be great to use with task cards. And again, task cards can be reused year in and year out. Put those in a Ziploc bag and you have a center ready to go. So the more that you can try to forward think and plan, okay, how can I make a center that will be able to be used again and maybe even multiple times in the same year? If you just change out the cards and use the same template, you can reuse and recycle those types of things. So that kind of goes on to say about those reusable materials that I was mentioning earlier. Dry erase activities that can be used year after year, or even in the same year with different task cards. This one that you see here, for example, is a template, put in a page protector, and has a student using a dry erase marker. And changing these task cards can make a completely different activity. Just like this example here. So this is called convention correctors. And you give students a blue marker, you give students a green marker, and you give students a red marker. If they are given a blue marker, they're going to be looking at the paragraph that's assigned to them and only focusing on punctuation errors. Only punctuation. So it gives them a very laser-focused lens to look through and focusing only on finding mistakes with periods, commas, quotation marks, things like that. Okay? Then if you are a green marker, you're focusing only on capitalization and correcting proper nouns, titles, days of the week, things like that. And finally, if you're a spelling specialist, you're focusing only on spelling mistakes and looking at that paragraph through the lens of a spelling expert. Now, in this type of activity, you could reuse these three cards over and over again and give different paragraphs each time. And you can mix up the markers. One week a student might be blue, one week a student might be red, and so on and so forth. Just a tip, it's nice and easy to use artificial intelligence to be able to develop paragraphs with mistakes in them. And you can reuse that kind of content in practicing or for practicing for students in these centers. Ask AI to give you a paragraph with punctuation errors for, on the topic of honeybees. And within seconds, you have something, a strip that you can use to fulfill this center. So again, strategizing like that. In this tool, again, you can be reused year after year. Okay. So just a couple last tips before we wrap up. Preparing and storing materials is so important. It's a travesty to be able to spend the time creating these things and then have to do it again the next year. So the more that you can invest some time in labeling or storing each center in its own containers, Ziploc bags, try to organize it by standard if possible or skill. You will thank yourself so much for that organization and the time it will save you in the upcoming year. And that when the next year comes, you might tweak, create new things, but you'll be able to use what you have already created that was successful for you in the year previously. Just to drive that home, the better organized you are, the easier it will be to maximize the time you spend with your students during small group instruction. Again, being able to pull things out of a box or a Ziploc bag and not have to, fluster to find or cut or waste time, organizing things, you can really spend every second with your students and targeting those skills that you're looking to work on. So organization is a huge benefit to improving small group instruction. Okay, so last piece I wanted to discuss about the planning is the monitoring progress piece. So the end of each small group time is really critical for that assessment and closure. You want to walk around and observe students, listen to their discussion, even if you pose a question to your teacher-led group and take 1 minute to leave them and walk around and monitor progress in the other groups. It really can make a big difference for you to be able to identify and strategically ask some questions for them to highlight the work that they're doing. So circulate, spend some time observing, listening to the discussions the students are having, ask questions, ask them to, highlight the work that they're doing, and really just close the lesson with reflection on what went well and what was challenging. Not just for yourself, but for students. They might say to you, "Oh, I was stuck on a question and I didn't know what to do." And then that's where you can start to think about how you can respond and navigate some of those situations. It's a learning curve, it's a learning process for everyone, your students and yourself included. And there's always room for growth and improvement in anything that we do, including this. So that leads me to my last piece here is the reflect and refine section. So good, better, best. We can always, continue to improve and work smarter and strategize and refine as we are working through these lessons and all of our lessons that we're working with students. So I'm going to share with you here oops, let me exit that piece. I'm going to share with you here a reflection question for small group instruction sheet. As I said, this will be shared at the end of today's webinar, but it's a great tool for teachers to take a moment, 1 minute at the end of a small group instruction session and ask themselves these questions. Did I give clear expectations? First, did I have enough materials? Did I differentiate? Did I provide feedback and reinforcement? Were students engaged? Was the time I allotted appropriate? You know, Were students given thinking time? Do I need to make any changes? How are students demonstrating proficiency? How can I honor their work? So there's just some great questions to help you get those juices flowing a little bit and think about what just occurred and how you can improve and refine for the next time that you are conducting small group instruction. So this tool is, again, great to just review and reflect and think through. Teachers are always reflecting, even without realizing it. If you're walking to your car at the end of the day and you're thinking about how amazing that long division lesson went and how everybody was getting it, that's reflection. If you were thinking about how, this day bombed and you were, what you're wondering what you could have done differently, you're reflecting there. But this is giving you a nice structured way to really identify what it is that you need to tweak or adjust to try to make things work a little bit better each and every time. So that brings me to the end of our webinar today. I just want to say thank you so much for your participation here and for joining me this afternoon. If you have any questions, my email address is odette.falone@inspiredinstruction.com, listed right here in the center. I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much, everyone.